Bona vesprada a totes i tots i benvingudes a esta taula en la que anem a parlar sobre negocis i complicitats en el genocidi i l'ocupació de Palestina. Jo soc Laura i tinc el luxe avui de moderar esta taula acompanyada per dos ponents que ara anem a presentar, per Maha Abdallah i Shir Hever, i també acompanyada per totes vosaltres. La forma en la que anem a organitzar este debat va ser que començarem amb una presentació i seguirem amb 5 preguntes per als ponents i després volem comptar també amb la participació de totes vosaltres. Així que esperem que això siga un diàleg des dels dos costats de l'escenari. Com deia, tenim avui dos ponents de luxe. En primer lloc tenim a Shir Hever. Shir Hever és investigador independent, és director de l'Aliança per la Justícia entre Israelians i Palestins i fins fa poc era el coordinador de la campanya per l'embargament del Comitè Nacional de Boicot Palestí. És doctor per la Universitat Lliure de Berlín i entre els seus temes de recerca incloem la privatització de la seguretat, el comerç d'armes i l'aspecte econòmic de l'ocupació israeliana de Palestina. Després tenim a Maha Abdallah, que és investigadora jurídica i defensora dels drets humans. Ella és palestina i va néixer a la Jerusalem ocupada. És assistent de docència graduada i investigadora doctoral de la Facultat de Dret de la Universitat d'Anvers i té un màster en Dret Internacional dels Drets Humans del Centre Delàs de Drets Humans. El seu treball i les seues publicacions aborden críticament qüestions de dret internacional, drets humans, apartheid, genocidi i rendició de comptes en el context del colonialisme i el genocidi israelians sobre Palestina. I tant Maha com Shir treballen de forma molt directa i estan directament implicats també en els moviments socials i les organitzacions que treballen per una pau justa a Palestina. Mireu, venia avui al tren i justament en escoltant música em venia esta cançó de La polseguera, de la gossa sorda, que sabem que ara torna als escenaris. I quan l'escoltava pensava en què podia ser esta xerrada i què són aquestes jornades, el que comentaven abans des de l'organització, que estem ací per crear coneixement, per reflexionar, per generar idees, però després també per aplicar-les. Tenim un context i per desgràcia Palestina viu ara mateix un context extremadament injust i difícil i cal que tota aquesta teoria, totes aquestes idees, després les posem a l'acció i les utilitzem per a seguir lluitant, per a ser aquesta polseguera que va creixent, que no para i que serveix per a acabar amb les injustícies. I dit això, comencem ja amb les 5 preguntes. La primera va ser per a Maha i vaig a fer les preguntes en anglès per a agilitzar. Sé que tot el món té la traducció, així que canvia de llengua ara. So for decades, the Palestinians have witnessed the Zionist occupation and the imposition of an apartheid system, and also the development and the growth of a state built upon violations of international law and human rights, all while the so-called international community looked the other way around. In the past 2 years, we have seen how this brutality grew, and parallel to this growth of brutality through the genocide that we have all witnessed through the eyes of the Palestinian journalists and Palestinian people who are sharing what Israel is doing there, the peoples of the world have been conscious, or there has been a greater consciousness over the situation there, right? And in some states, like in the case of Spain, people have started thinking of how we went from this idea of silence is complicity towards actually realizing that we are participating in the occupation, in the apartheid and the genocide. So in that sense, I would like to ask you, what are the structures, the actors and the dynamics that make colonialism and genocide possible in the 21st century? And how is the current legal framework, how is reacting or not reacting that much to it?
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you to the organizers of this conference for extending the invitation. And before I begin to answer your question, I also wanted to say thank you to the organizers of the conference for grounding the theme of the conference in the urgency of today's reality and the present moment, where calls for justice and peace are being totally overshadowed by the ongoing normalization of increased militarization, of atrocity crimes, including genocides, not only in Palestine, but in many other places around the world, including Sudan, Congo, and elsewhere. And all of these, they're being committed and they're being advanced under the so-called civilization, democracy, peace, and security. And this is the moment to remember that peace without justice is not peace, and any political settlement that ignores accountability, that ignores justice for those who have been oppressed, suppressed, and subjugated for many decades, it's not a path to peace. It's a path to further colonial oppression regimes. It's a path to extend the lifetime of these regimes, like we see in Palestine. So what Trump and his allies have put forward as a peace plan is simply buying Israel more time to put its final touches on its settler colonial project in Palestine. And we should recognize that as a reality, as a fact, not something that is subject to debate. And peace cannot, in Palestine specifically, it cannot be the continuation of the occupation, of the colonization, of the apartheid, but under different themes or branded differently and so on, or new terms. True peace today means that the occupation ends, that the colonization ends, that the apartheid is dismantled. Its structures, from the prisons to the apartheid wall to the military occupation that is in place to the checkpoints, barriers to the web of Israeli discriminatory laws and military orders, and many, many other elements of these structures, they need to come to an end. They need to stop. And this is the first step to actually realizing peace in Palestine. And at the same time, we cannot talk about peace with a state that is being charged and is on trial for genocide in the world's biggest court, the International Court of Justice. And we can't make peace with war criminals and with heads of states like Netanyahu, who have been issued arrest warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Again, this is not peace. And a true peace means that the stopping of the flows of all the arms, of all the military weapons, equipment, and material to Israel as well. Impunity does not yield to peace. A peace with impunity only legitimizes the power, it only legitimizes more atrocity crimes, it only legitimizes the current state of our world. And we've already seen what peace has done in Palestine, in the Oslo Accords, of course, and that has meant, again, buying Israel more time to develop better weaponry, better sophisticated methods and structures to dominate, to subjugate, and to exterminate the Palestinian people live on TV for 2 years, with most of the international community either unwilling, unable to intervene, or a significant bunch of it directly contributing to these atrocity crimes in Palestine. And going specifically to your question about the structures that exist, I mean, since its creation, Israel has very well and very strategically and systematically designed different ways to impose territorial and demographic fragmentation in Palestine and to fragment the Palestinian people as one significant and foundational tool to advance its settler colonial regime in Palestine. And these and it's used structures for that, the military occupation being one, whether it is after the Nakba and until 1956, or the military occupation that was instated after 1967. And then we have the apartheid regime, the institutional discrimination and racism that targets the entirety of the Palestinian people, not only Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory as we know it today, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. No, the 15 million plus Palestinians at home in Palestine, across the entirety of Palestine, on both sides of the Green Line, and Palestinians in exile, Palestinians Palestinian refugees in refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, they're also being targeted and subjected to Israel's colonial regime, to Israel's apartheid. And this is something that we must also acknowledge today, because we need to treat Palestinians and the Palestinian people as a collective to counter their fragmentation if we are ever to really get to a moment to truly realize the self-determination of the Palestinian people. And as for the actors, of course, Israel is the main colonizer, is the main perpetrator in this equation. But Israel cannot and has not been acting on its own. If it has, it would not have succeeded to sustain itself in 100 years of warfare against the Palestinian people, even before the creation of the State of Israel. So, and as we've seen in the past 2 years, it became very visible, very clear that the US is a co-perpetrator, is a co-colonizer in Palestine and the wider region as well. And this is why we've seen civil society organizations in the United States filing charges of genocide against the Biden administration for its support and material, political arms and so on for Israel. We also saw Nicaragua take Germany to the International Court of Justice, invoking the Genocide Convention for Germany's material support, funding, and arms transfer and political cover for Israel's genocide. And other actors, of course, include the international institutions, for example, the Security Council, and it is, unfortunately, doing the exact opposite of what it's supposed to be. The US being in the lead of blocking any attempt to resolve or to bring to an end whether the currently ongoing genocide or the overall colonization and occupation. And this is not new. Again, this is not new. We've seen this happen over and over again over the years. On 11th of May of 1949, as massacres were being perpetrated by Zionist paramilitary groups and by Israeli groups, we saw, and the Nakba, the start of the Nakba between 1947 and 1949, on that date, we saw the UN General Assembly voting to accept Israel as a member state of the international community. And if you read the resolution that was passed in 1949, they call Israel a peace-loving state. So it's not only absurdity. Here it becomes a question of the direct involvement and enabling that the UN institutions and international institutions have given to Israel in order to allow it to start, create, and proceed with its imposed Nakba on the Palestinian people. And of course, in terms of actors, we're seeing Arab states more and more aligning with US interests, aligning with Israeli interests, and failing the Palestinian people significantly. We have the Palestinian Authority, who has unfortunately become an extension, an arm of the Israeli occupation in Palestine, where it actively attacks, persecutes its own people, whether by arrest, detention, killing, torture, restricting freedoms of expression, assembly, and association. Instead of continuing on a liberation trajectory, they're going hand in hand with the colonizer to subjugate and persecute the people. And with regards to the final point about the international law and its response to what has been going on, particularly in the past 2 years, the instruments, the frameworks, they exist. It's not a matter that there's a lack of tools to trigger, and these have been triggered. But as we can see, none of them have been able to put an end or stop or pause even atrocities that have been committed. This UN Security Council is one example I already mentioned, but we have seen some minor successes, if we even want to call them successes, in the international arena. The ICJ advisory opinion of last year, in 2024, finally, it recognized that Israel's occupation in Palestine is unlawful. I mean, it took 4 or 5 decades for the International Court of Justice to come and say that this is an illegal occupation. I personally would not call it a success, but a delayed confirmation of an already existing fact. And of course, nothing has happened since then. even though the General Assembly passed a resolution with a majority consensus saying, yes, Israel must end its occupation within the next 12 months. Last September, it was the anniversary of that resolution. And here we are with Israel expanding and entrenching its control and domination, continuing to exterminate Palestinians in Gaza directly and indirectly, continuing to expand its annexation and control, and finding new methods and ways to get Palestinians outside of the West Bank and to displace them and to forcibly expel them. In short, what I'm trying to say that the mechanisms exist and they have been repeatedly activated, not only in the last 2 years, but for maybe 7 decades now, because Palestinians, Palestinian civil society, and their allies and partners around the world, including here in Catalonia, they have been at the forefront of pushing these international instruments and mechanisms to do better, to meet the obligations and the rights and responsibilities and so on. But they have failed. They have failed miserably to deliver any tangible justice or relief for Palestinians. And this is because their functioning, it remains constrained. It remains constrained by the political limitations that are designed to preserve instead of challenge the colonial and imperial interests in our world. Sorry for taking over.
Thank you very much for your powerful words, Maha. And we are going to go now to the second question that is going to be for Shir. I wanted to bring this quote to the table by human rights activist and professor Noura Erakat, who in November 2024, she wrote the following in Twitter. I quote, "We have been watching Israelis kill Palestinian babies for sport with US weapons for over a year. Soldiers boast how many they have killed, and Israeli families ride boats to watch bombs fall on besieged people from the sea, as if in a stadium." End of the quote. Thinking about the enablers of genocide, apartheid, and occupation, a key actor is the arms industry, which shapes the militarization of Israeli society while dehumanizing Palestinians. We could do a whole conference on this topic, and it would be our pleasure to listen to Shir on a whole conference on this topic. But taking into consideration the time we have, I would like to ask you, how are military companies profiting from facilitating the genocide and the ethnic cleansing and occupation of Palestine? And how is this connected with the militarization of Israeli society? Also, I'm thinking now towards Spain, how is that important that we understand that we should focus on the whole perspective of the arms business, taking into consideration imports, exports, and transits?
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me this evening to speak here. I'm very impressed by this Congress and by so many people coming. I will try to answer the question in a concise way as much as I can, because your question is not just addressing the Israeli military industry, but actually the global military industry in its role and complicity in the genocide. And I think here it's very important for us to go, not to be satisfied just with our moral and our legal level of analysis, where we say, of course, this is wrong, and of course, this is illegal, but also to understand how it works, what is the structure of the military industry in order to be able to counter it and to protest in an effective and meaningful way. I have recently conducted a research which tried to estimate how much money did Western arms companies profit from the genocide. This is not something that can be calculated by looking at the Western companies themselves, because they are lying or they are hiding, of course, how much money how much weapons they are selling to Israel. But from the Israeli side, it's possible to construct a methodology to see how much money Israel is spending on weapons and what proportion are going to the Israeli domestic arms companies, and then what proportion goes to foreign companies and how many are Western and so on. It's possible to make an estimate, and my estimate said, is $80 billion. $80 billion that the Western arms companies, mostly in the United States, number 2 is Germany, number 3 is Serbia, have profited from the genocide. But there is something that I need to qualify and to make it a little bit more complex, because in the contracts that I saw that the Israeli government is importing those weapons, starting from October 2023 and until the end of 2024, the ones from 25 I could not see yet, but until the end of 24, in the contracts, they always say, this is the amount that we will pay for the weapons. This is the number of years that the contract will cover, because it's over a period of time. And in the first year, we pay nothing. So the weapons are actually bought on credit. The arms companies expect to be paid in the future. And this is all under some kind of assumption that in the future, Israel will cover its debts. And this, of course, on the one hand, is very optimistic from the arms companies and very naive. And the international governments, the Western governments that are vouching for these agreements. So if Israel doesn't pay, we will pay. We in Europe, for example, yeah. But in addition to this, it creates an incentive for these Western countries to protect Israel and to help Israel's violence, because that will ensure the ability of Israel to pay the debts later. So this is also a process that creates complicity. Now I want to divide it a little bit into countries. The United States arms industry is, of course, motivated by imperialism. It is a tool of the US empire. It's not just for profit, it's for power. And the military-industrial complex is a term that was coined regarding the United States by President Eisenhower. The US is using Israel not just as a source to buy a lot of its weapons, but also as a place where Israel is using those weapons, testing them, showing how these weapons work, and then it promotes these weapons to be sold to other countries. So the complicity is also in a collaboration with Israel as promoting the deadly imperial power of the United States at the expense of the lives of Palestinian civilians, and of course in an illegal way. So this is to understand the role of the United States, and maybe it's worth mentioning that there's a new report by the Watson Institute for Middle East Studies in Brown University that shows that while the Biden administration has given Israel free weapons worth $18 billion at the expense of the US taxpayers beyond the normal annual military financing that the United States gives to Israel, $3.8 billion every year, the Trump administration has stopped it. Trump is willing to sell to Israel as many weapons as Israel wants, but Israel has to pay for them. This is a difference. Now I want to talk about Europe. In Europe, I think we cannot really talk about profit in the same way, because it's very clear that for many European countries, the arms trade with Israel is not a good economic idea at all. But here, the complicity is much more political. And if we look at the deal that was only published this week, it's a very new piece of news that Germany is paying 2 billion euros to buy Spike missiles from Israel. This is a deal that is very stupid from an economic point of view and from a military point of view, because I think everyone knows that the Spike missiles are not actually weapons of war. They are weapons of assassination and genocide. They are used to kill civilians. They've never been used actually against a conventional army, against tanks. But by spending all this money and by buying them, the German government is signaling that it opposes its own public opinion in Germany and is complicit in Israeli crimes, and also trying to signal it to the rest of Europe. So I think this is where we see the defense establishment in Europe and part of the Rearm Europe and so on, which are tools to use Israel to support the right-wing factions, the militaristic factions. The Gulf states also deserve a short mention, because they are also very important in terms of the arms trade. And I think that we can call the Abrahamic Accords, the so-called peace accords between Israel and some Gulf states, more than anything, these were actually arms deals. And I think from the point of view of the Gulf states, they see Israel as a proxy of US imperialism, and they say, well, we want to be the proxy instead. So the way to do it is to buy a lot of weapons, and to have good military relations with Israel is a way to get entry into the US military trade. So it's not because they need the Israeli weapons for anything else. But I think it is interesting to point out that after Israel attacked Doha, the capital of Qatar, the UAE has banned Israeli arms companies from its arms fair. So if this is a consistent policy, it means that the Abrahamic Accords have come to an end, actually. And finally, and this is the most important point, is about the Israeli arms industry, where I think, of course, you don't need me to tell you that the Israeli arms industry enables the genocide by making weapons that kill Palestinians. This is very clear. But I think it goes beyond this, because the Israeli arms industry is making record revenue and getting a lot of money, but not because it exports more than it exported before the genocide, but because it sells to the Israeli government. But the way that the Israeli media and the arms companies themselves and the Israeli government are telling the story is as if this is a sector of the Israeli economy that is prospering, and the fact that Israel is experiencing a massive economic crisis, which could be the end of the State of Israel and the end of the Zionist project, if this crisis continues to escalate, everything is fine because Israel can recover based on the profits from arms exports. So the arms industry is also used as a propaganda tool to mobilize the public. And this also answers your point about how it militarizes Israeli society, because Israel has been on a process of demilitarization, which is for a very long time, for many decades, but not in the sense of becoming a less violent society. Unfortunately, violence is extremely strong. But as a settler colony, when the violence is decentralized to settler militias, they don't function as a military. They don't follow military discipline. Every Israeli with a gun can consider themselves to be a warrior who can kill Palestinians if they want and not be punished for it. This is not militarization. This is something else. Now, during the genocide, the mobilization of the public by using the military industry as a symbol of what it means to be the State of Israel and the Israeli economy, and by the military industry, the arms companies saying, we are getting volunteers and we are bringing back to work the workers who retired, and this kind of language to show that the whole population is mobilized for war, and it brings back this idea of a very extreme militarization.
Thank you very much, Shir. So now we are going to go back to asking Maha, and we are going to talk about boycotts and the economy of genocide. UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, published last spring summer, this report called From the Economy of Occupation to the Economy of Genocide, in which she explicitly exposed a series of companies that are part of the structure that make possible the Israeli occupation and genocide of the Palestinian people. But she was not the first to do it, right? Other initiatives, and the most well-known and very, very important is the Palestinian-led BDS movement, which has been working since 2005 on building consciousness on the peoples of the world, right? When they made this call and they say, peoples of the world, organize yourselves and may boycott, investment and sanctions to Israel, because we need Israel to accomplish international law, to be abided by it, and we need to make pressure on that, right? So In this sense, I wanted to ask you how private companies are playing a role in the colonization of Palestine, and why are boycotts, why is the collective effort of people every single day when going to the stores and deciding what to buy or what to consume, why is it important? And also I want to say that this is important, but it should be the bare minimum. Like at this point, we should all be doing it. So it's important, I guess, and you will explain why, but also it's the bare minimum that we should all do.
Absolutely, it is the bare minimum. And that's, yeah. I'll try to take less time than the first question. And as you rightly mentioned, it's not only that in the past 2 years that corporate and private actors have been involved in Israel's settler colonial project, apartheid, occupation, and genocide. But prior to that, it was already clear that these structures that Israel has created in order to dominate, to persecute, to eliminate the Palestinian people from Palestine, they could not have, Israel could not have sustained this. It could not have made it through all these years if there wasn't someone or something paying the bill of this occupation, of this apartheid regime, and at the same time making profit out of it for Israel itself, but also for the associated industries and sectors and private actors. And naturally, corporate actors, both Israeli and multinational ones, across all sectors, they have played a key role in sustaining Israel's settler colonial regime in Palestine, and it, again, made it profitable for themselves, for Israel's allies. And there has been maybe several key sectors that are worth mentioning. We can't, of course, name all the companies because we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of companies involved, big multinational, small business enterprises, Israeli, multinational, and whatnot. But for example, the weapons and arms manufacturing and industrial complex is key, as Shir has highlighted. It is the one producing the materials, the arms, the weapons that have been used to kill, suppress, and persecute Palestinians, and then it's marketed and sold globally as tested on the battlefield. So Palestinians are the Palestinians are the test, the rats on which these weapons have been used. And then another key sector is the surveillance industry. And this is not only, like when we talk about surveillance, this is not only spyware. It is a significant component of it to spy on people, to collect data from people's conversations in Palestine, also has been used very much abroad, including here in the Spanish state, to target parliamentarians and human rights defenders. But also we need to think about how surveillance systems are used, how Israel uses them in checkpoints, in barriers, in prisons and detention centers where Palestinians are incarcerated and held, in population databases and so on. The heavy machinery and construction sector as well. This is one of the significant ones. It's kind of, it's working in two parallel ways. On one hand, it's we see like JCB and Hyundai bulldozers demolishing Palestinian homes and structures and property. And on the other hand, we see the same bulldozers building settlements or building, contributing to building the apartheid wall or checkpoints or whatnot. So this is something that we see like very visible when you drive around Palestine or when you look at documentation for demolitions of homes and so on. The other one, which is less talked about, is the sector that is working or that is involved with the exploitation of natural resources and literally stealing Palestinian natural resources. On one hand, Palestinians are not allowed to access their land, agricultural land, to access water reserves, to access the natural resources where there are minerals, gas, fuel, and things like that. And on the other, we see companies like Heidelberg Cement, but also many others going and extracting these. They have like a preferential treatment to access these by the Israeli civil administration, which is a branch of the Israeli military in one way or another. And they're taking all the water. They're using agricultural land in the Jordan Valley to grow dates, to grow avocados, to grow herbs, and different types of fruits and vegetables that are then sold here here in Europe and being marketed as if they are a produce of Israel. The same applies for, as I mentioned, minerals, gas, stones, and so on. And these are all exploited and utilized without any Palestinian consent. And the other sector is tourism. Airbnb, Booking.com are the ones that immediately come to mind. They're promoting property and rentals in occupied Palestinian land. And at the same time, in some instances, they're also promoting historical sites and heritage sites in settlements on occupied Palestinian land as being in Israel. And the other key sector would be the financial sector. And here I'm referring to banks, to pension funds, to investors, and all of these, they have been channeling money directly to Israel, to Israel, to the regime of apartheid and occupation. The settlement enterprise is one of the key elements where these financial institutions have directly ensured the flow of financial flows into the settlement enterprise. And of course, when we talk about private actors, maybe they're not corporate actors, but universities, the institutions of knowledge production, are also part of this sector. And they have been involved in research, in policy making, in the development of weapons, of arms, surveillance materials, and technologies, jointly in cooperation with European and international academic institutions, universities, and research centers. And as I mentioned, the corporations, the private actors, they take advantage and profit from Israel's economic subjugation of Palestinians. They exploit Palestinian labor as cheap labor. At the same time, they benefit from access to Palestinian land and resources without, and all of the profit goes to the company and to the Israeli economy. Almost none of it goes back to Palestinians, and if anything goes back, it's literally crumbs and crumbs of what should really go back to Palestinians. In law, there is a term for that. It's a crime to do this. It's called pillage. It's theft. It's a war crime under international law. And as I mentioned, it's impossible to name all these companies, banks, private sector, charities even as well. But as you mentioned, there has been decades and decades worth of documentation and evidence produced by Palestinian civil society, like the BDS movement, Palestinian human rights organizations, and we're seeing it now become more mainstream, let's say. The UN data, the United Nations Human Rights Council issued a database of companies that are involved in the settlement enterprise, but unfortunately they neglect the wider occupation. They only focus on businesses involved in the settlement enterprise. And we've seen many coalitions and movements in Europe, around the world, trying to expose their governments and the corporations within their jurisdictions' involvement in Israel's occupation. So why are boycotts important? It's a very brief answer. In principle, both in law and in principle, governments should be the ones regulating corporations. If we want to talk about it like that, they should be the ones telling corporations, no, don't do businesses where there's an armed conflict, don't do business where there is a genocide, because you may be liable and you may be held accountable for that. But of course, we know that that's not happening. In practice, we know in general, no state is able to counter the corporate power in today's world. If anything, corporations are exercising more influence and capturing political decision-making spaces and so on. And specifically when it comes to Israel, it's always an exception. The law does not apply to Israel for some reason. So instead, what we see is that groups, organizations, and individuals who are calling for divestments and for sanctions in the private sector, they're being criminalized, they're being labeled as anti-Semitic and whatnot. So when governments fail to uphold their own obligations, their responsibilities, whether internally within their own domestic space or extraterritorially, like in a place like Palestine, so if they're failing to hold corporate power to account, then it's up to us as individuals, as collectives, to understand and acknowledge what we mean to the corporate sector and how we are also benefiting and how much we can influence and affect the corporations and the private sector if we start boycotting. And boycott becomes it's like, as you said, the very, very bare minimum of what we can do, and let's think of it as a very delicate form of resistance in today's world. That's how I would frame it as well.
Thank you very much, Maha. And as you say, like this little form of resistance. You know, yesterday I'm from El País Valencià, and there we were celebrating because the BDS movement, we have been doing campaigns to boycott the dates coming from the occupied territories. And yesterday, the main supermarket, which is a cooperative Consum, it has stopped selling dates coming from the Israeli settlements, and now it's selling Palestinian dates. So it's a little victory, it's a little act of resistance and solidarity, but we should all work towards that, right? So now we are going to move again to the arms industry, but in this sense we are going to talk about embargoes. You know that the Red Solidaria contra la Ocupación en Palestina, the Spanish solidarity network with Palestine, against the occupation in Palestine, since 2 years ago we have been working in a campaign to end arms trade with Israel. This campaign was fostered by Red DESC but joined by more than 600 organizations, a really important one, el Centre Delàs. And we are really proud, and it's I don't want to boast about it, but it is true that 2 years ago when we were talking about embargo, that was not even a familiar word in the streets of Catalonia or of Madrid or any other territory. But right now, probably the average citizen has heard about the embargo and is conscious about why embargo to Israel is important. As our colleague Alejandro Pozo says, as a moral imperative, but also as a legal imperative. Actually, I remember that, I think it was 1.5 years ago, you were here in Madrid doing this conference with Alejandro Pozo, and you were talking about this, right? About the importance of the embargo. And it is really essential to say that Spain hasn't imposed an arms embargo yet. There was some movement, some restrictions have been applied by your parliament, but we do not have an embargo now. Still, we considered it, and some Palestinian organizations supported us in saying that this was a symbolic step, because Spain, as an EU state and member of NATO, that was a symbolic step finally towards the right direction, but only a symbolic step. And in this sense, I wanted to ask you, Shir, what do you think are the strengths or the importance of embargoes as a strategy, and also how do you see the international picture of on this topic?
Yeah, all the time I have fights with Red DESC, and the reason that I have fights with them all the time is because in my work for promoting the military embargo, and I meet with a lot of groups from many, many different countries, and I always tell them you have to do it like Red DESC. You have to learn from Red DESC, because this is a movement that was so strategic and effective in building the call for the military embargo from the grassroots, from the movement, through civil society, through the media, and through legal action, and going all the way up to the government. And even Prime Minister Sanchez, who said some terrible things and expressed very pro-Israeli views, is now calling on the European Union to impose a military embargo on Israel. And this is thanks to the work of Red DESC. But they always don't like it when I do it, and they tell me that, like you said, we still don't have the military embargo. We have to push more. We have to do more. So yes, of course, it's true. But both arguments are true at the same time. We have to understand that the military embargo is something that is growing very fast around the world through those restrictions, and each cancelled arms deal, each stopped arms shipment is part of the growing military embargo, even if by itself it's not enough to say that this is a fully implemented military embargo imposed by the government. And it is also true that the Spanish state is not the country that is leading the military embargo in the world. The countries that have been first and most vocal and pushed for it even before were countries from the global south, like Colombia and Malaysia and South Africa. But I do think that the Spanish state is leading the military embargo efforts in the West. And this is extremely important. This is extremely important from a symbolic point of view, that the Spanish state is taking the Western countries, which are the most complicit with Israeli settler colonialism, with the Israeli apartheid system, and have supported it from the beginning, and to force these countries to recognize and to consider and to discuss it in courts until the weapons stop. When I started, I worked for 3.5 years as the military embargo coordinator for the BNC, the Boycott National Committee, which is the steering committee of the BDS movement. And my job within the movement to coordinate the military embargo, when I started it, I thought, okay, I'm getting the least satisfying job in the organization because the military embargo is going to be the last campaign that will succeed. Of course, first you have boycotts, consumer boycotts, then you have divestment, and sanctions come last, and the military embargo may be the last sanction because it's a very big ask, and the complicity is so deep. And what ministers of defense are going to agree to give up their weapons, it's not so easy. But I was wrong. And the moment that the genocide started, I found myself sitting in front of decision makers, members of parliament, even ministers, including here in the Spanish state with Alejandro in Madrid, and also here in Barcelona, where we talked about the legal obligation to impose military embargo. And because the law is so clear, what can they say? What can they say? It is encouraging. And even if the situation continues to be very sad, and even if people are being killed, even now with the so-called ceasefire, but Israel is violating the ceasefire every day. But we cannot ignore what is coming from the Israeli side, what I'm hearing from the side of the Israeli media and the Israeli government, where they are admitting that they are running out of weapons. And one of the points about this so-called ceasefire is that a lot of Israelis think, oh, now it's going to be no longer necessary to spend so much money to bring in the weapons and the ammunition from the countries that are still willing to sell it to Israel, but of course it costs much more because the normal channels are closed. On Sunday, last Sunday, Netanyahu said in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, that Israel dropped 153 tons of bombs on Gaza on that day. And I think this is also a sign to show that if the Israelis think that they're not going to be able to continue, then the number of weapons they have or the number of bombs they have is the number of bombs that they will use. And because of this, we have to understand that the military embargo is not just something that is imposing the law, but also it is something that saves lives. Every box of weapons, every container that is stopped is people who will stay alive. And because it's not just that we understand it, it's also that the decision makers understand it and the media is understanding it. It is the way that the world itself is changing. Everyone likes to talk about the rules-based world order and how the legal system that was imposed in order to control these things. And the Arms Trade Treaty is extremely important, even though it is not as strong as we would want it to be. But we see that the countries that are openly violating the law and breaking the law, the international law, in order to be able to deliver weapons to Israel are the United States, which believes that they are above international law, and we will see how long it can last. Germany, which is now facing a constitutional crisis, a political crisis, because they are violating their own constitution, and because Germany is only allowed to exist based on its commitment after the Second World War to adhere to international law, and it's breaking the promise. So it's a very serious crisis for Germany. And Serbia, which is a country that is not very famous for its adherence to international law either, and also pays a price for it, of course. So I think that this is why the military embargo we have to look at it exactly from these two sides, like this fight that I have all the time with RESCOP. On the one hand, we still have to fight more and to understand that more needs to be done and how important it is, because every action that we take is really saving lives. And on the other hand, we have to recognize that we did have successes, that it is making an impact, that the Israelis are feeling it, and not lose hope.
Thank you very much, Shir. So to end with the questions and then continue with some questions by the audience, I wanted to go to the part of the people's power, right? For decades, because this has been going on, solidarity with Palestine in Catalonia and in other parts has been going for more than 20 years, but particularly in these 2 years, we have seen flotillas navigating to break the siege in Gaza, boycotts, massive demonstrations, general strikes, cancellations of sportive events like in La Vuelta, and also cancellation of cultural events. Palestine will be free because of the resistance and the sumud of its people, from the journalists who are telling the stories of what is happening there, to the doctors that are saving lives, and to the workers that are rebuilding the houses even after each attack. However, from outside of Palestine, we also have a responsibility and a role to play in supporting the decolonialization of Palestine. And in this context, I would like to ask you, what do you think is our role from outside of Palestine to break the complicity with the occupation and the genocide, as the title of this conference claims, and also in these strange and horrible times we live, in which Israel's main partner, USA, is calling that there is a peace plan, in which certain parliaments are applauding to all of these, and we see that bombs keep falling in Gaza, that colonization keeps advancing in the whole Palestine. Which do you think it should be our focus, or as civil society, in what Kanafani said, that it's not only the cause of Palestinians, but it's also the cause of every revolutionary?
I think I would start by emphasizing in the current moment the need to continue to fight the battle of the narrative and the consciousness, the awareness battle, because we're also in a moment with a lot of propaganda, a lot of misinformation, a lot of twisting of facts and realities. It has always been the case with the Zionist project and the US and their allies. But in this particular moment, we're seeing someone like Trump and Netanyahu being branded as peace heroes. I mean, this is something incredible. So we really, it's a battle by and in itself to make sure that our awareness, our narrative stays as correct and as close to the reality on the ground as possible. Because without that, we're unable to really mobilize and act and to find the spots that will really hurt this apartheid and colonial regime in Palestine, in order to bring it to an end. The other point I wanted to touch on is it's beyond amazing what we have seen the past 2 years, especially in a place like Catalonia and the Spanish state, in terms of how the social movements and the ordinary individuals as well, civil society, have responded in the sense of escalating their action, escalating their strategies, expanding, coordinating, bridging with other movements as well, not only here in Europe and elsewhere. But the point is that it also came at a price. And I know many Palestinians would certainly hope that I understand that it was driven by the bloodshed, by the massacres, by the atrocities that we continue and we have been seeing on a daily basis, on our phones, on our screens. But at the same time, this should not be the benchmark. In the Netherlands and Belgium, a few months ago, they started this red line campaign, drawing the red line for Israel. The red line for Israel should have been drawn decades ago. And if it had been drawn, this red line, by the international community of states, of corporate actors, of civil society, then we wouldn't have reached this point. The genocide that we're witnessing today could have been prevented and should have been prevented. It is not a miracle. It is not something impossible to have prevented it. It just needed a bit of responsibility, largely on part of the states, to really stop the impunity that Israel that has been enjoying and to stop the political and financial support. So we can't stop once now because there is an agreement that has been signed by Trump and Sisi and I don't know who. No, this is not it. We know, I think most of us in the room know very well that the atrocities are continuing, not only in Gaza, but all over Palestine and against the entirety of the Palestinian people. Our struggle did not start in 2023. It started well before 1948, and this is why we need to find ways to continue the escalation of actions, to continue the boycott, to continue demanding a full two-way arms embargo on Israel until the Nakba of the Palestinian people comes to an end. And I hope that this call is heeded, that people, I know it's exhausting, and I know most activists and defenders and lawyers involved in this, they're exhausted, especially in these 2 years, but we must find ways to strategically coordinate and ensure that the work that has been built in these 2 years, whether it's to hold Israeli soldiers accountable in courts around Europe, or whether to ensure to campaign for arms embargoes, or whether to boycott and get companies and financial institutions to divest, we need to find as many ways to make it as sustainable as possible until this monstrous, barbaric reality that we're enduring and that is crawling all over the region and the wider world is stopped.
I really don't want to take away from anything that you said, and I think, Maha, you said it very well, because this is really the content and the goal of our activism. I do want to contradict you on one little point, because you said two-way military embargo, and it has to be three-way. Especially here in this country. Three-way means that it's illegal to sell weapons to Israel, of course. It's illegal to buy weapons from Israel, and it's also illegal to transit weapons to Israel. This is the number 3. And because the ports of the Spanish states are very important for the transiting of weapons. We should not forget this. But if I can add something, not to the content of our movement and our purpose, but maybe to the background and to the methods. So from the point of view of the background, let's remember that in 1492, so more than 500 years ago, again it was a ship or some ships from the Spanish state arrived in America and changed the world and created a Western hegemony that exists until today. But nothing lasts forever, and it is coming to an end. I think we are seeing it coming to an end. But every era that comes to an end in a very painful way. And the place where this big geopolitical transformation is exploding and burning the most is Gaza. In this sense, Gaza has become the center of the world. But the question which we don't know the answer for is what new world will be birthed after all of this pain. And here it is really a question that is addressed to us and what we are going to do in order to define the new world that will emerge. And I think it is a terrible, terrible burden on the shoulders of Palestinians that they have to suffer so much, and they are suffering so much for the crimes that other people have committed. But as the quote from Kanafani is reminding us that they are in this central moment of history, and we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to take action. And so I think that the question, that the way that you phrased it, was not just what should our action achieve, which is something that Maha covered very well, but also how do we succeed? And here, I don't like to repeat myself when say let's learn from RESCOP, but again, I think that we do need to work in a collective way and to work on many levels and to build our alliance from the grassroots through the civil society and the media and legal action, getting to the level of decision makers and working on the boycotts and divestment all the way up to the sanctions as a strategy that plans ahead and where every one of us plays a role, and we need to know what role each one of us can play in order to achieve this, and then we can really be effective.
Thank you very much. We have been straight on time, but we started a little bit late, so maybe we have time for, I guess, one question or two if we ask them together and we then respond together, maybe, so we don't take that much. So are there questions on the...
No. Una qüestió molt ràpida en relació al factor de la Unió Europea. Una pregunta pel Shir. El factor de la Unió Europea com impacta en el tema de l'embargament? És a dir, la Unió Europea i la llibertat de circulació de les mercaderies, la unitat de comerç i aduanera, està facilitant que Israel es salti l'embargament de l'estat espanyol?
Hay otra al fondo.
I'm asking if this more is really the best way of working, because isn't it time to also bring in much other kind of issues like culture, like a more political attitude against the whole project? And I'm from Sweden, so I cannot avoid singing this song. Leve, leve, leve Palestina. Leve, leve, leve Palestina. Och krossa sionismen. Vi har odlat majorden och vi har odlat, skördat vetet. Vi har plockat citronerna och vi har pressat dadlarna. So this is about the earth. And they have not only stolen, they even destroyed the Palestinian seed bank. So this is much, much more exterminism than only stealing. There's something really big going on in terms of exterminating our future. It's not only about Palestine, it's about the future of the whole mankind, and some culture and some more wider things that can bring in much more people into this than only effectiveness. Because effectiveness, I don't think will bring us, because that will make people tired. We have to be more radical, maybe. The question is it enough with more? Shouldn't we try to bring in culture and trying to be more radical?
Thank you very much. One more. And if it's a woman, better. No, ¿a una mujer?
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to ask if you could shed some more light. Oh, sorry. Do you hear me? Sorry. Would you be able to shed some more light on the role of that Serbia has in this arms trade? Because I understand that Serbia does not have the capacity, so I assume its role is mainly in transferring the arms from other countries. So that means involvement by the producers. Thank you.
Y si me dejas una más, porque es el presidente, que si no, no, ¿eh? Pero que sea corta.
Molt ràpid. Una pregunta pels dos ponents. Com qualifiqueu a l'estat d'Israel? Perquè el considerem encara com un país democràtic. Vosaltres ho considereu com a tal? Israel, l'estat d'Israel, encara el podem considerar des del punt de vista formal com un estat democràtic?
La última, que si no, no ens
siento,
queda
Laura.
molt de temps. Però moltes gràcies per totes les preguntes.
Moltes gràcies. Gràcies al Centre Delàs, gràcies als dos ponents. La pregunta és, pot tenir alguna relació amb l'actitud covard, inqualificablement covard dels governs i estats europeus davant d'Israel? Pot tenir alguna relació amb les patents que Israel controla des del punt de vista de les telecomunicacions, des del punt de vista tecnològic, des del punt de vista de la seguretat militar, que fa que fins i tot coses com el govern espanyol, quan fa aquestes mesures urgents, siguin un colador d'excepcions, com molt bé ha analitzat el Centre Delàs, permet un colador d'excepcions que es converteixin en la norma i per tant que quedin en res el fet de l'embargament. És a dir, Israel té un poder de treure patents que estan funcionant actualment a Europa amb tots aquests temes i per tant crear un fosc, un apagón electrònic amb defensa i tal, i aquesta sigui part de la por que els estats europeus tinguin i que justifiqui la seva covardia moral?
Moltíssimes gràcies. Doncs passem, si voleu, a respondre les preguntes. I don't know who wants to go first, either Shir or Maha. And we try to respond them all together, maybe like one after the other.
Okay, I cannot answer everything, but I will try and to answer quickly. First of all, the European Union likes to say that it has no capacity and no authority to do anything or like to impose a military embargo because the member states have to do it. This is of course wrong. The European Union can do a lot, and I think that we should pay attention to the speech that Ursula von der Leyen gave in September 10th, where she is the most one of the most racist and pro-Zionist leaders in Europe, and unfortunately the president of the EU, and openly supports colonialism. But when she spoke in front of the European Parliament, and half of the members of the European Parliament were dressed in red as an act of protest against the complicity in genocide, she was cornered. She had no choice, and she gave a different speech than she wanted to give, and she said that even though she maybe has different opinions, but the law obligates the European Union to impose sanctions on Israel, and those sanctions are on many different levels. So when we are thinking about specific states like the Spanish state, let's say the Spanish state says the company Elbit Systems, Israel's biggest arms company, is a criminal company and must be outlawed. But if they have offices in Luxembourg and in Germany and in Italy, it's a problem to outlaw them and to stop all trade with them. And it's still possible for the delegates from the Spanish Ministry of Defense to go to Luxembourg and meet with Elbit Systems. That's why we need to impose the sanctions on the European Union level. The question about Serbia, I'm afraid I don't have time to get to all of this, but Serbia actually does have a factory that makes 155 millimeter shells. And this is the one weapon that killed more people and destroyed more property and injured more people than any other of the weapons that Israel has been using. And most importantly, the 155 millimeter shell is also used by the Israeli artillery to erase the evidence that the other weapons are dealing. So if Israel is launching a missile or a bomb, later they also bomb with 155 millimeter shells so that we cannot gather the evidence and take them to court. So Serbia, in this sense, plays a very big role, and there are constant planes bringing more weapons from Serbia to Israel. But there are other things that Serbia is doing, so we can talk about it some other time. And finally, the question about the electronic systems, I will let you answer if Israel is a democracy, because you are the legal expert. But the issue of the electronic systems, I think that we have to understand it the other way around. Because Israel is a rogue state that is exploiting things like spyware, that is, and this happened here in Catalonia, yes, that the Israeli espionage company NSO Group has a back door to the information that was used to spy on members of the Catalonia parliament. And this means that relying on Israeli companies, even for civilian infrastructure in electronics, is just a very bad idea. It's very dangerous. And Israel can attack anyone. In the last 2 years, Israel attacked 6 sovereign states. So there's absolutely the prudent thing to do is to not develop those dependencies.
I'll answer to the question about and the song that you shared. Just to quickly say, I don't know if you're with us still, that the effectiveness of escalating our actions, our collective actions, and then turning to culture and to more radicality, they're not mutually exclusive. They go hand in hand. And there's not, if anything, they enrich each other and they allow us to get further. And this is why I think part of the battle for awareness and narrative, Europe needs to come to terms that Zionism is racism, and that Europe has emboldened and enabled Zionism to turn into a genocidal machine in Palestine, and affecting not only the region but the entire world through its technologies, through its arms, through its weapons, and so on. That needs to be acknowledged, and accordingly, the responsibilities, they need to be acted upon. And this takes me to the other question about how do I classify the state of Israel. I classify the state of Israel as a genocidal state. It's a settler colonial genocidal state. Zionism has always dehumanized the Palestinian people and has always sought to eliminate them and to remove them from the land and to destroy them. And I don't say that because I'm Palestinian. I say that because when you read the archives and when you look at the Zionist leaders from the 1800s and the 1900s and before Israel was created, you see how they portrayed Palestinians. They didn't even see Palestinians as existing at that moment in time. And they continue to do the same. So when there's a state that it was created entirely, and its entire creation and existence is premised on the dehumanization, subjugation, and elimination of another people, this is not a democratic state. This is a genocidal state that needs to be recognized as such, that needs to be isolated from all forums of the international community, so other states and other actors do not think that it's okay to do this without any accountability and without any measures against it.
Bé, doncs moltes gràcies a totes i a tots per haver escoltat i participat, i sobretot moltes gràcies a Maha i a Shir per esta conversa que ha sigut un luxe. Seguim.